you a quick lesson about kegs and draft beer. We're covering draft beer terminology, anatomy of the kegs, couplers. We'll go through a few bits of troubleshooting, how the operation actually works. We won't go through things like beer pouring in this lesson at all, or anything about regarding how beer's made and constructed. We'll just keep it all about the hardware, because that's what the issues are when you guys are having some issues with the beer. First of all, construction of kegs are a massively cool invention compared to what they used to serve beer in, which is basically wooden old casks, which were permeable and subjective to light, and as well as dehydration and oxidation. So having things like kegs makes draft beer a lot simpler, makes it a lot easier to package, a lot easier to distribute, serve, and to, in theory, get it to the customer. These are all pressure rated to about 500 kPa, which is closer to that 75 psi, which is about 5 bars. So if you think a copper machine's operating off 9 bar, these things are only rated to about 5 bars. So no, not as indestructible as they seem. They do have catastrophic failures. If you go on YouTube, you'll find some of those catastrophic failures. Terminology when it comes to the keg. So the entire unit is called just called a keg, which can apply to most things. We're talking about obviously draft beer kegs. Top here still retains its old name. It's actually called a bung. So a bung is any permeable hole in a keg. When you start talking about casks, which is the English method of serving draft beer, they'll have 2 openings or 2 bungs. The draft beer we use in Australia only has 1. On the bottom, convex portion of the keg on the bottom allows for beer to be cooled, also known as sometimes a sump. Don't usually hear that word, it's more of a terminology regarding pumps and whatnot, but it can be called a sump if you get some of the analogy coming through. Up the top here, we have our coupler, which is connected to the bung. We also have our locking lugs for connecting our coupler. In the centre here, rubber valves, and then we've got the metal ball in the centre there called a poppet. So poppets are not just a unique draft beer term, it's also used in a lot of engineering stuff. So the method of tapping a keg is reasonably simple. The coupler is installed in the bung and opens up the beer to be served. How that's done is through this poppet there is a metal spigot that goes all the way down to the bottom called a spear. It doesn't have any reference to actual spearing, it's more of basically a large metal tube, but that's designed to go all the way close to the sump down the bottom where it lets the beer extract and pull underneath before sucking it up. How we get this beer out is we just make our own artificial gravity. In this coupler there is a thing called a check valve and a Thompson valve, which allows the gas to go in but keeps the liquid to come out. How it works is that as the coupler is inserted and placed onto the vessel, as you engage the coupler, the entire valve pushes down and that allows CO2 around the outside of that valve to flow into the top, into the headspace, which creates our force, which is going to extract the beer from the bottom of the spear. The CO2 on the side there it's installed, and the pressures, serving pressures, regard about 10 to 14 psi depending on the system. We'll go through a little bit of that in a second. As we engage the coupler, CO2 presses down on the beer, the gravity does the rest, physics does the rest, and the beer comes up through the line. So the entire construction, in theory, should be a lot easier, but with all things, the more complex you get, the greater the problems you extract. So things like serving beer out of bottles, which had used to be done, were a more foolproof way. And the reason why draft beer is called draft beer today and why it's served as draft beer is because back in the sort of late 1800s, when they started managing to get draft beer into package format, the draft beer didn't have the pasteurisation problems that bottled beer does. So draft is synonymous with beer now because it was a method of relieving some of the issues that packaged beer itself was generating. Unfortunately, we get a whole host of new problems with technology and temperature and CO2. So the coupler construction is probably the first issue you need to look at. So the couplers in Australia we use are all D-type, delta-type couplers. You might have seen A-type couplers, which were the old horseshoe ones, which come largely from Germany. We also have S-type couplers, which are exactly the same as the delta types, except the spigot goes down a little bit further. Very, very easy to mistake the two, and you'll take a beer shower if you do try and hook an S-type up to a D-type. So just make sure that when you're pulling it out, that coupler extracts all the way. You don't see the M-types or the U-types in Australia as much. They're very, very much a niche market. Occasionally you get the old Japanese Asahi kegs, you might see some of those M and U types. As I mentioned before, the coupler is constructed including a Thompson valve and a check valve, and the way they work is like an airlock in a toilet. So back in the day when you used to have 2 doors, that's been removed and now has a U-shaped bend. That U-shaped bend is effectively how the seal works, except it only engages when the handle is down. So it's like 2 doors in the front. So as the handle engages, those 2 doors lift up and the S-bend or U-bend opens up and allows the beer to be extracted. Much better improvement on the day when you used to put the coupler down and engage the handle without a line, beer would shoot directly up. It's a safety measure that's been installed in the latest generation of couplers. You shouldn't experience any of the old couplers. I think they've gone the way of the old ball bearing spirit pourers, thankfully. There's very little that goes wrong with these couplers, apart from the little flange in here being extracted or breaking. And you might find that the actual the handle unit, comes off. They're very, very easy to replace. They simply just go in with a little bit of force, much like Lego or anything like that. Aside from that, the inner workings on the coupler are, I think, roughly regarded for about 50 years. So you shouldn't really, in your lifetime, have anything with wire on the inside. Occasionally, your quick disconnects, which is your units at the top here, which is pretty much the universal method of Australia connecting beer couplers and taps. It's simply 3 steel ball bearings held under tension by a spring. As you pull a quick disconnect back, they pull out from tension, and you can slide in your connections, your lines, your gas lines, or beer taps. Engaging the coupler is as simple as pulling the handle back and then forcing it down. That lets the snip lock disengage, goes over the top, drops the spigot, which will depress the poppet, which allows the flow of beer. So that's mostly the operation of kegs. When you tap it up, in theory, we create our own artificial gravity, forces the beer through the line, and it falls nice and easily. That doesn't always happen, and what we're going to go through now is a bit of troubleshooting regarding the kegs, which is probably the most important part, which you guys will experience when you're playing around with the vessel here. The first step in troubleshooting, and it's a very good step in any time of troubleshooting, regardless of IT or business or hospitality, check the physical. And what I mean by saying that is any physical options you can check yourself before actually determining if there's a problem. So that might mean the coupler hasn't been engaged. That might be your first problem, which is a physical problem. You might have the CO2 not being switched on. You might have no tap on the front there. You might have an obstruction in the tap. So any physical problem that is physically stopping the flow of beer is the first point of call you should check. Similarly, if your computer doesn't work, check the power point first. Obviously, sometimes the biggest, easiest solutions are the simplest solutions. If that's not the case, and you've checked the physical, which is your CO2, the coupler's engaged, the beer is tapped, make sure the keg's got beer in it. If you lift the keg up, you should feel the beer sloshing around. These 30-litre kegs will weigh roughly 39 kilograms when full. A full 55-litre keg, or 50-litre keg, will weigh close to 63 kilos. So if you can pick it up and hear a beer sloshing around in it, it generally means that there's indication that the problem might be something other than that. Aside from tapping a fresh keg or changing your couplers over, engaging all the physical methods, the next step you want to go through is checking the lines and the line, anatomy. All draft beer, when it's installed by companies like Arndale or any of the C&B operatives, they'll go through a specific set of measurements to make sure the lines are the perfect length. When we start pouring beer through lines, as the liquid travels through the line, it experiences resistance. And so what we need to do is have enough pressure in our CO2 to get over that resistance, and then have more at the end to make sure it pours at a specific rate to make sure that the CO2 stays in solution. It's a very complex method of working out the line and your meterage and your diameter to work out your resistance, but roughly you work out the resistance in your line and then you add an extra 12 psi as you're pouring pressure at the end. You guys should have no problem dealing with any of that, because it should all be engaged by the time that you actually started working in a venue. Lines need to be replaced in theory every 5 years. I'm sure they don't get replaced every 10 years currently in Australia. So very, very rarely will you have a line anatomy issue. If you're not getting beer because of the line anatomy issue, it might be that the beer line is split, which can happen. When people talk about beer freezing in the lines, as the liquid expands, it can split those vinyl tubings. Very, very rarely does it happen, but when cleaning lines, water can freeze, and if freezing water is left in overnight, the pressure can surmount enough to split those lines and the lines fail. A very, very rare occurrence. I've never seen it in 10 years of hospitality. Have heard those stories though. After the lines and the physical, the next step you should probably go through is your temperature. So CO2 stays in solution by 3 things. It stays in solution by gravity, which is a little amount. It stays in solution by pressure, so additional pressure will keep more CO2 in solution. Also stays in solution by temperature. If you get warm spots in your lines, if you get warm spots in any part of your beer draft system, that's going to cause foaming. And that's probably one of the number 1 issues that people don't wrap their head around. So if you've got a warm keg, pouring straight through a tap with no ice plate, you're going to experience warm beer. If you have lines that are run through a glycol system, and your glycol isn't running anywhere between -2 to 2 degrees, you get spots in warm beer. I'm not sure if you've all seen it when you pour beer occasionally, the foam starts pulsing. You'll just have warm spots in your line system, which is generating the foam in portions of the line, which will create more head and excessive foam on your beer, which results in wastage. The other side of that is your fonts. Fonts and old venues might have chiller plates under the bar where the beer keg is not kept warm, which is exactly what we've got here, but they'll run through either glycol chiller plates or they'll run through ice baths or immersion chillers before hitting the tap there. If you're not pouring beer for a large amount of time and you haven't got a flooded font, all the beer that's in that font is going to be warm. It's going to be basically foam before it gets to the customer's glass, which is why occasionally you'll see venues that pour off, or they'll miss that first scoop of beer because that might be a turn foam in the lines. When you're pouring foamy beer, you want to try and start with as little foam as possible and then work up. So it's always easier to generate foam at the end than it is at the start. If you're pouring foamy beer or beer onto foam, what you're doing is pouring a liquid through basically a colander and you're spraying it and creating more CO2 bubbles in that glass. It's very, very hard to save a beer like that. The very last check that you want to do for this system is the pressure, which unfortunately is the first thing that everyone reaches for. Everyone's like, the pressure must be wrong. The pressure is very, very rarely wrong. All of the beers that come out of Tubb brothers are served roughly 12 psi. But when we're talking about beer, we start talking about volumes of CO2. Most of our lagers are carbonated to about 2.4 volumes of CO2. And what that means is that if this keg was empty, you'd have 1 volume of CO2 in there. So we get 2.5 times what could fit in that in terms of CO2 and squeeze that in. So by putting more pressure on, we're creating pressure on top of the beer in solution. When you talk about the micro sort of molecular level, it keeps everything in, all the CO2 is forced into the liquid and doesn't come out. Other venues, depending on the style of beer, your German Hefeweizen is going to be much more foamy, your Belgians are going to come across as much more carbonated, things like your British ales are going to come much undercarbonated. British ales can sometimes be close to 1.2 volumes of CO2. But coming out of the brewery, it's very, very rare that you'll have issues with your beer being overcarbonated in the keg, because if you've got that problem, the brewery's got a much bigger problem than just the 1 or 2 kegs that you've experienced. When pouring for our pressure, I think we're using about 40 kPa, which is about 10 or 11 psi off the top of my head.
Can we pull that up so we can have a look at that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the way that CO2 works here is you've got 2 dots in itself, and the second is the dispense pressure that's coming out of that CO2 line. Just for your own personal knowledge as well, CO2 line's always blue, oxygen's yellow, and nitrogen's red. Not that you'll experience many, if any of those in when you work at a brewery. As we turn our cylinder on, the pressure will show that we have pressure inside the tank, as well as the pressure that's coming through that line, which is probably a little bit high for now, so we're going to drop that down a little
Should
bit.
you always readjust it to the line?
The line is an excellent guide, and as I mentioned, this is probably the last thing you should check. There's 2 methods of fixing foamy beer in the keg. If you've got foamy beer, the counterintuitive solution is actually to turn the pressure up. So as you put more pressure on the keg, it stops the CO2 bursting out because there's less room for it to go into. It has to exert more pressure to come out of solution than it does to stay in. So if you overcome that hurdle, you can actually pour beer quite effectively. It's very much a short-term fix because you don't put extra amounts of pressure on this keg, because if you leave that keg coupled up and attached, the beer will actually soak up that extra CO2 and then you're starting to get some diminishing returns when it comes to pouring that overcarbonated beer in solution. So your dispense pressure is different from the pressure that's generated inside the keg. It is a very short-term fix. It might save you for the service, but it won't save the beer in the long run. The theory being that some people turn the pressure down to stop the beer foaming at the tap. It does work occasionally in small amounts because you're not putting as much pressure to go through the lines. If you can overcome the friction of the line itself and still get beer to come out the other end, that's a victory. But usually the guide is set to about sometimes 17, 20 psi to come through, depending on how long your lines are. This should only really be adjusted by sort of a communal consensus, or the person who's in charge of your cellar should be adjusting this, because this is the last thing you should adjust because it is such a variable. You don't want to stuff this up. It's always easier to solve your temperature problems than it is to solve your pressure problems. Simply turning the pressure up, again, like I mentioned, would save you initially, but then down the long run, especially when you're dealing with multiple banks of kegs, if you've got beers that are different pressures inside the kegs and you just up the pressure, you might fix one, but you're going to stuff up the next 4.
So am I correct in saying, so the first, if you have foamy beer, the first thing you check is like that you've got enough ice in there and that the lines are cool?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. So would we want that ice well to be pretty much full, half full?
You'd want it covered Well covered. As long as the chiller plate is quite cool to the touch and the ice isn't scattered, you should be fine. Once that chiller plate soaks up enough temperature, it will actually work quite effectively until the ice becomes sporadic.
So how long would it take to chill that appropriately for there not to be issues with the beer?
For a chiller plate, you probably do well chilling that down in 20 minutes before you have any issues. If you're talking about a beer temperature being about roughly 18, 16 degrees in an ambient temperature, close to probably 20 at the moment because it's been sitting out for a long time, these chiller plates run a very fast series of up and downs to basically run and extract all that temperature. So if you chill the entire chiller plate down, you're always going to have the warmest beer touching the coldest part of the chiller plate.
So you'd want to wait at least 20 minutes then till you went and tried anything else if you were having issues.
Correct. Yeah. You want to make sure the temperature is always a little bit easier to solve than the pressure, which sounds daft because you only have to tweak a button to fix that pressure up. But fixing the temperature will solve probably 90% of the problems you have.
So the first thing you check is the ice and the cold, like the cold level, and then you're saying the handle, the coupler.
First thing you should check is that the seal is engaged and it's pouring beer properly. If you can get beer to come out of that tap, that's probably all the physical issues you'll need to worry about. If you're having foamy beer coming out of that tap, that's when you start to get the second part of your troubleshooting.
Would you physically detach the coupler and put it back in to make sure it's in there properly?
Yeah, that's an excellent way to just reset and ensure that you've got that coupler engaged. Occasionally these rubber seals do degrade. This one's degrade a little bit, nothing that would actually affect the quality of the beer. Also sometimes these keg seals do come out. So they just need to be put back into place by the manual, just with a finger or a pen, and install them back into place quite comfortably. The seals on the kegs usually get changed every 6 to 8 months. They don't degrade very, very rapidly at all. So as long as there's no physical obstruction for the beer in terms of the coupler and the connection to the coupler, that should be fine. You're more than likely to have a yeast buildup in the font and the tap, and you'll have a physical obstruction in the line than you are to have an issue with the coupler, which can happen quite regularly. You've all seen a beer poured with a few floaties and a few things that come through. That's just natural yeast sediment build-up in the lines. It'll get extracted after it peels off over time due to natural pressure.
It could just be a student's left the handle up rather than putting the handle back down.
If it's not fully engaged, that could be the place. Absolutely.
Can you show me how you put that on again?
Absolutely.
I'm not really sure.
So there's two locking lugs that fit either side of this coupler, and they go left and right, up and down. So just spin it till, disengage that coupler first. Once the beer goes on flush, it's simply a quarter turn to the right, just so it's wrist tight. Doesn't need to be any more than that.
Yeah. So my issue that I've had recently is I've tried to connect this in when I brought you up here, and it's gone everywhere. Why is that?
Likely because the spigot has been engaged, and as you push that coupler down, the coupler will press the popper.
No, definitely wasn't. And then I thought the seal was broken. I thought, does it have something to do with that seal because it's split?
A split seal shouldn't generate the extraction of the liquid. So this seal is designed to push the entire seal down itself, and that's how the CO2 flows out the side and fills the headspace. So an issue with the seal would be more of a CO2 connection issue rather than a beer, because the beer is being forced down. So if it was a seal issue, you'd probably hear a hissing of gas rather than a generation of liquid, simply because the liquid comes up through the spear, which goes all the way down the bottom. Up the top here, unless the keg's on its side, you should have just straight headspace for CO2. So it's unlikely that a seal issue would result in beer foaming out the top of the coupler.
Okay, so you've got to make sure the handle's up.
Yep. Handle's up.
If you're putting it on and you're pushing down too much, would that cause the same reaction? It's as if the handle's down, but instead the handle's up and you're pushing down too much.
Possibly.
Push out. I've had that happen before too.
Yeah, I've had it happen to me twice recently.
Pushing down.
Let's try it.
You can push down excessively and open up the seal. It's not an excessively hard task to do. It's not something I've experienced myself, but it is definitely a possibility. Yeah, exactly. So when you depressurise these kegs, all you need to do is get a pen and just put it into the CO2 valve, and you actually get escaping gas. It's a very, very light manoeuvre that just opens up the entire keg to the atmosphere.
Okay, so you turn it to the right, quarter of a turn.
Turn it to the right, quarter of a turn, engage the handle.
The whole way down.
Whole way down, and that keg's tapped up, ready to go. We get lines and CO2 in there, we can quite comfortably pour some beer through that. With our chiller plate behind us as well, chiller plate submerged in beer. As I mentioned, it's a series of snakes that the liquid runs through to chill the beer down rapidly. Rather than actually how it works is that the liquid basically gives up its temperature to the chiller plate, and because the chiller plate's got such a large surface area, it disperses it quite rapidly, chills the beer down to about 2 or 3 degrees, probably closer to 1 actually, and then as it pours out the font, you'll lose another degree, so it goes back up to 2 or 3 degrees. By the time it hits your glass, it's about 2, 3, 4 degrees, which is enough temperature to keep the CO2 in solution. So if this chiller plate is submerged in ice, you shouldn't have any issues with the temperature.
Okay, so we've still got foaming issues. We've checked the coupler, we've checked the ice. You're saying the font's the next
The
thing?
font is the next step, correct. So dismantling the tap, which is your quick disconnect system as I mentioned before. So pulling the tap off and making sure that tap operates quite smoothly. The tap we've got here is very, very handy. Back in the day, there used to be a full 90-degree action to get that beer to flow. This one's a very swift action. There's very little that should go wrong with that actual tap.
Can we take it off?
We can, if I can get this one off.
Sorry, I've never done that, so I'd like to see it.
Oh, I can't even put it back on.
So I'm too scared to even take it off. I just don't want beer all over it.
Quick disconnect doesn't want to come off.
So we've got the spanner. Do we need? No.
Obviously, you have to make sure the beer's disconnected, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
By that you mean the handle's up.
Yes.
So you make sure the handle's up so there's no pressure going through it before you
Yeah.
go.
Do you need a napkin? I'll have to edit this bit out.
Might need some boiling water because the prop has been boiled.
I was going to say it hasn't been.
I just want to see. So lefty loosey.
No, so this is a quick disconnect, so it should theory.
It's like a wine stopper.
Push it in and pull it out.
It's like a wine
So,
stopper.
is that something we should be doing weekly so they get cleaned
yeah,
and
sure.
don't
A
get
bit of
stuff?
clean, to be honest.
Probably.
Soaked inside the water.
Yeah, it's just okay to give it off.
I put boiling water on it and it always gets stuck.
Might have to get some hot water just to extract it.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I'll get some from the tap. So,
So this could be our issues is because none of us know how to get it off. We're not checking where the blockage is. Is that where one of the most common issues is?
You can have small blockages in this tap. It happens irregularly. It does happen though. But now that I'm playing with it and struggling to get it off, I might see a seal not connecting correctly. So you want it connecting properly with everything locked in nice and airtight. If it's not, it might just mean there's been a build up. There could be pathways for the beer to foam out the sides, which result in foamy beer. There we go.
Oh, well done.
Nice one, Steph. So yeah, the pathway that the beer flows through is very short in these handles, so they're designed to be as minimal obstruction as possible. If the beer doesn't go all the way into the connection, you might find that as it flows through, it experiences a little bit of a gap between the connections, so it flows up and down rather than straight through. The turbulence may end up with a bit of foamy beer. So part of your physical should probably take this tap back off and put it back on and make sure the connection's nice and clean. And as I mentioned, irregularly you'll find there's a yeast build-up in the lines here, so a physical obstruction through the beer flow, which will result in foamy beer. But that can be fixed by just a quick dunk in some warm water and a quick rinse out.
So you're dunking that, not the end of the lines.
No, correct. Yeah, there should be. There's very rarely going to be a problem with the couplers with the lines, simply because these units and the line units, they're like AK-47s. There's not enough moving parts for things to go wrong, which makes them pretty easy to service. The dismantling of this is pretty simple. I won't go through it here, but it's literally everything that screws on and off can be screwed on and off, and then rinsing it out probably once a week is probably enough to keep this beer line clean.
I'm sure we're not doing it once a week. So
Never done it.
yeah, so that could be why we're having issues.
No, it can be done. So when it's placed on as well, just inspecting the fonts for any visual obstructions. There's a small rubber seal in there that, as I mentioned, has very few issues with it. It's pulling the quick disconnect back, sliding it up, and then the quick disconnect will connect itself once pushed through.
Okay. So that's 1, 2, 3 things to check.
Yep.
Coupler, ice, handle. Okay.
It's
Failing that,
if you have pressure in the system here, it's very unlikely to be the pressure. If you can get beer come out through the line, it's more the temperature than anything else.
okay, it's good to know.
Yeah.
I suppose that's
And
most of the stuff
also,
that
sorry, if the glasses are actually getting warmer as well, it'll still come out frothy, won't it? Like if they're
Yes.
not stored here, if they've just been in the glass washer and you're pouring into a warm
Yep.
glass, it'll come out frothy
Absolutely.
too.
So the glasses, it's critical that you have what's called known beer clean glasses. So the beer clean glasses go through a dunking scrubbing to make sure that they're clean and visibly clean. Also go through the sanitizer, make sure they're bacterially clean. Warm glasses is, as mentioned before, it's a temperature issue. So if you put cold liquid into a warm surface, you're going to create an explosion of CO2 out of that liquid, which will result in foamy beer, which is spot on. The other side of things is that if you have a shear surface, you're not providing nucleation sites for the CO2 bubble. But if you've got an oily, greasy, dirty surface, you'll find that the CO2 will latch on to small bits of debris and small bits of filaments and fibres and create a CO2 bubble there, which more bubbles will form from. So dirty glasses create more CO2 nucleation sites, results in foamier beer, which means the bubbles dissipate faster, which results in what tastes like flat beer or experiences to be not as enjoyable beer.
So would our glasses be cold enough in there, or should we be putting them in the fridge prior to doing a special beer service? Or
You can, it won't do much good. Room temperature glassware is fine for what we're doing. Temperature changes more than about 8 or 9 degrees, probably where you start coming to massive instances of CO2 foaming. But for what we've got, glassware at normal room temperature should be fine.
okay, so the pressure gauge down the bottom, where the black line is, you were saying is where we should try and keep it.
I'll have a play. I don't think it needs to be that high, but it is a small variable that you play with. But I'll readjust this one and make sure that it's serving at dispense pressure.
So you would suggest in class that not everybody touches it, like one person in the business is responsible
Similar
for
to
it?
like a barista with the coffee, the responsibility should rest with your manager or with the cellarman or the stock person. One person's in charge of that. That way there's not multiple variables when it comes to engaging it. It should be shown to the students so they know what it is and how to operate a CO2 cylinder, but regulators are definitely something that needs to be known as not something that you just have a chance to play with.
There's no little sign on there, do not
There
touch?
used to be a do not touch sign.
Yeah.
It seems to not be there.
Someone touched it.
Yeah. I think it just needs to be, it's one small part of the lesson that certain things in every venue are restricted to certain people who are responsible for them, and the CO2 is one of them.
Does everyone know how to change the CO2?
Yes.
No, I wouldn't feel comfortable.
Do we have like 5 minutes to quickly
Absolutely.
go through how to change the CO2, if that's okay?
Yeah, certainly. If I have I might need a small wrench to
Yep, it's behind you, attached to the other gas.
Yes.
Was it a student who was changing your cake, or was it a Beerology?
No, me twice.
So you leaned over it,
Yep.
you just leaned too far in and you just opened it up.
So when you're changing a CO2 cylinder with all sort of gases, you just obviously need to take care of yourself first. So make sure that the CO2 cylinder is turned completely to off, and then your cylinder that you're changing to is also turned completely to off. The thread that is on the CO2 cylinder is a reverse thread. So whereas usually you'd screw things righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, in theory these ones should all be lefty-tighty, righty-loosey. So there's a thread that's sealed by a small locking lug nut, which is this copper or brass piece right here. And all you need to do is just loosen this up to make sure it's able to be spun by your fingers before extracting it. So I'm just going to use my little tool here. Once that's loosened, you spin that lug nut off with your fingers. And the connection there, a little bit of thread tape and a small, I think it's hexagonal, hexagonal seal, followed by a movable locking nut which creates the tight seal between the two pieces of connection. To engage it, as you can see, the thread and the seal are pretty basic, there's not a lot going on. As long as this handle's closed, you won't experience any sort of purging or sort of extraction of gases. So to connect it on, just meet up the two seals. They won't join perfectly, and then what you need to do is just slide your locking lug nut on and then spin it so it's finger tight. This one's actually a righty-tighty, which is handy. And then as it's finger tight, just want to make sure that that seal is just nice and tight. It doesn't need to be wrenched completely into place. Because the threads on these units are so long, it's very unlikely that you'll have a CO2 escaping out the side. Once that's on, just gently engage turn the CO2 cylinder on. Should hear a small hissing if there's no pressure in the lines, and then that's good for service.
Is everyone okay with attaching the beer lines? Yep.
I'm going to open the floor to any questions if you have them.
Is there any can we just attach the beer lines? Have we got
Absolutely.
beer in it, just so I can see?
In terms of the pressure on here as well, so in the keg, sorry, in here.
Yep.
So what should it be? If it's empty, it's going to be obviously right in the yellow.
Correct.
Is it? Okay, cool. So it's almost empty.
Yes.
Yeah, cool. Just making sure.
So these couplers actually have gas in written on them, so the gas always goes in the side. Beer comes, the analogy or the little rhyme they use, beer comes out the top is the easiest one that I've always gone by. Occasionally when you're banking kegs, you'll tap the liquid lines from keg to keg going through the CO2 in, but in our instance we're just using one CO2 line in and one beer line out the top. So as the CO2 goes in, just a quick disconnect. Doesn't matter what sequence you connect the coupler or the lines in, doesn't really matter at all. They're a lot safer than they used to be. Just pulling the quick disconnect back, sliding it in, connecting it up. Beer line, straight at the top. So pulling the quick disconnect back.
So in our case, we probably already have them attached to that coupler, and would just be replacing.
Yeah, if it was down, that's when it comes out.
They need to be cleaned each time the keg gets empty.
Yeah, quick spray or rinse with warm water, cold water, that should be fine to...
The coupler.
Yeah, to clean. You can just dump that into cold water and then, just dry it out, it's
And that's
fine
when you
to
can't
use.
disconnect it.
Because we're not operating in a cool room as well, you will have microbial growth, so things like all the yeast will start coming in there, other infections will sort of generate there. Simple spray and wipe with chemicals enough to sort of clear that up. There's nothing that's really too infectious that gets inside the keg. It would be very hard for infection to get inside the keg. And in theory, if I've connected that up, so I've got my CO2 in, I've got my beer line in, I've got my tap and right handle.
But no ice.
No,
Oh, there it is.
No, this is good. What we want it foam.
Because I was playing around the lines as well, I managed to lose a bit of beer with that line. So as the beer is connected, it'll fill through, purging all the CO2 from that beer line out.
There's a bucket underneath if you want it.
usually.
Oh. Okay, starting to come
Yeah, I
through.
normally get a spare bucket. So if it's the end of the class, it can soak.
It's probably a little bit fast, so I dial the pressure down a little bit. But for the most part, beer seems to be pouring in a reasonably acceptable manner.
That looks like the pale ale.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
light.
Have we got a different one?
I think this one smells like Kung Fu, which is the rice lager,
I like
which
the Kung
is
Fu.
a little bit lighter in colour and appearance than the other beer. It's not as golden and amber.
Okay, fantastic.
Any other questions?
So to untap it, you just do exactly the same thing.
Yep.
You turn the gas off, then lift the handle up.
Overnight, gas can just be switched off, lift the coupling handle up, and it's just so that if there's any leaks in the system, you're not going to lose your CO2 bottle overnight.
So that's what you do when you're not using it.
Yeah.
Very good practice
Essentially,
for...
we should use water.
So you clean the coupler every time you change the keg, and once
Yes.
a week the handles need to be disengaged
Yep.
and cleaned as well.
So is
And
there still beer in the line that you need to pull through at the end? Not really.
There is beer in the line, you don't need to pull it through. Having warm beer is never a desirable option. Unfortunately, with the circumstances we have here, it's something that we can't avoid. As each strip comes through and plays with beer, you should probably pull the first 2 or 3 through to show how foamy beer is when it's warm, followed by how it should look like when it's serviceable. So it's similar to your ground coffee and the dosing chain at the end. It's something to use as an example to have in most real world situations. Yeah.
that's a good idea.
In my day, we used to run water through the lines at the end of the shift.
Correct. You can still do that. You'll need a openable keg or a Cornelius keg, which are available. We don't do that so much these days because of the glycol and the draft rooms will often operate below freezing. Putting an easily frozen liquid into the line can result in sometimes the lines freezing overnight and splitting. It's something to be done usually once per week as part of the line cleaning regime, or once per fortnight usually, so I think industry standard. but it's done during the day, and then the lines are filled back with gear up overnight towards the end, towards the start of service.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone want to hear?
No.